Today we're going to be talking about what it takes to prepare for a move abroad as an older adult. I want to thank some of you that asked me that question in the comments on some of my other videos. So I prepared a checklist and I want to go through some of those things today in this video because it's different than moving abroad when you're younger, that's for sure. So if we haven't met yet, I'm Gail. I'm coming to you from my apartment here in Wuhan, China. And I moved here about 7 months ago to teach English at a local university and spend some time exploring this country by living here. So today I want to talk about all it took to prepare to get me to the point where I actually moved. I did spend probably about, I would say, a year planning for it, but I had been thinking about this for probably 5 years. So if you're like me and you've been thinking about this for a long time, this might be just the video for you. So I want to thank those of you that subscribed. If you want to support this journey of mine, please like and subscribe. You can get more videos like this and share in some of my travel adventures too. So I'm going to be looking down at my notes here on my computer and probably drinking my coffee here while we talk. So I think the first thing that you need to think about when you're considering a move overseas is why, right? So why are you thinking about it? Is it, you can go back and watch my first video that I made about the 10 reasons why I was thinking of moving overseas. A lot of them were financial, but I had been thinking about this for a long time. I lived overseas as a younger woman I moved to Taiwan when I was 28, and I ended up living in Taiwan for 7 years. I met who's my ex-husband. I met, a husband there, had a baby there. I had a whole life there. And then I moved back to the U.S. for 22 years, to be by my mom, raise my son, all those kinds of things. And so it had been a really long time since I moved overseas, but I sort of knew what it was like. But as an older adult, having raised a child, we end up, I became more fearful after I was a mom, right? So, I had to work through all the reasons why I was thinking of moving overseas. Was it just a midlife crisis thing? Did I really want to be living in a different country? Did I just want to travel to places? And so you really want to get clear on what your mindset is and why you're looking to move abroad, and know your why. We always have to know our why, right? And then we want to think about, have we made major life changes before? Is this something, have we ever made a major life change before? I think I'll do another video on how to reinvent yourself. I've reinvented myself probably 4 or 5 times since I turned the age of 40. So you want to be thinking about that. Have you reinvented your life before? What were the steps that you took and why did you do it? So if you're watching this video, you're probably pretty good about things like that. So know your why, think about why you want to make the change. And one thing I had to be thinking about, and I was thinking about very strongly, was the phrase, wherever you go, there you are. So, we all kind of carry ourself with us wherever we go. And I had some stuff happen with my divorce, and, there was some family stuff going on. And, I was seriously thinking about, am I trying to just run away from life? Or, if I move overseas, am I just trying to get away from this reality? And then I'm going to take it with me, even if I go somewhere else, right? So we have to think about that pretty carefully before we make the move. And I did think about that. With the motivations, I just want to share my personal story about kind of what motivates me. And, we're older, so we know ourselves now. And I started noticing, and maybe it's just because of the workforce is just kind of toxic now in the U.S. And I don't mean to be negative, but it had been my experience where it wasn't like, oh, you could just stay at a job and just stay there. But I also noticed with my own personality, I like to learn new things and do new things. So now that I'm 60, you think about how many years left do I have? Do I really want to be stuck in a place for the whole time? I wanted to be able to have the freedom to do different stuff when I wanted to do it. So this overseas life for me, I knew I didn't want to travel overseas, and I knew I didn't want to just be a digital nomad or whatever. I really wanted to work and live in a place because I like getting to know the people. I like living in places. I like walking the streets. I like getting to know, and I don't want to just have to live out of a suitcase. So figure out what you want. There's, you can find on YouTube all these people that are slow traveling and they're living this expat life where they live in one country for 2 months and another country for 2 months. It's okay. I might want to do that when I'm older, but right now, what I really like is that I'm in Wuhan, I'm in this area of China, and I live here. My stuff is here. I have a home here, and I'm not just living out of a suitcase. Like, I have stuff up on my walls, and I'm living here, and it's not this huge panic to see stuff. Like, I just did my 5-city tour. I share those videos. Traveling is tiring. So I like it, but I also feel tired when I travel, and I've got chronic fatigue. So I personally like living in places where it's not such a panic, and I can just get to know the culture in I call it super slow way versus just slow way. I remember when I moved to Taiwan, it took me probably like at least a year to really kind of get what that country was about and understand how the people worked, how the country worked. So that's me. So I wanted to be able to move someplace, but then I don't have to stay here forever. These are 1-year contracts. So if I want to move to another country, I can move to another country if I want to. So know who you are and what you're all about and why you're doing what you're doing. It just goes back to knowing what your why is and really tapping into who you are and what you want to do. I found in my last few jobs, I was like, I'd get in there and then you see how toxic the company is. And I hate to say this out loud in public, but then you're just like, oh gosh, do I have to stay here? How long do I have to stay here? And so I kind of decided when I'm 60, hey, I can, if I can get jobs for a year at a crack, why not do that? And so that's what I'm trying now. We'll see if it works. We'll see. But so the second thing is you want to think about what country interests you. I mean, there's so many different countries in the world. There are 186 or something like that. There's so many different countries. So you want to think about what has always interested you. I have always been interested in Asia. Ever since I was little, I just was fascinated by, the rice paddies and people working in the rice fields. And there's something about Asian culture that has just always attracted me. And more so than other cultures. Like, I never even really wanted to move to Europe or, Latin America, any places like that. So Asia is kind of my place. And I had whittled it down to a few different countries, and I'll share that in a different video as well. But you want to think about, what country are you attracted to? And then you want to start researching that. Like, what is the visa process to live there? What is, what is the language like? What are the requirements? Do they have, retirement visa options? What is the cost of living? So you want to research that country. How safe is it? Safety is super important to me. That's why I like Asia. And so you want to research that country and try to understand the ins and outs of that country. So after you think about your country, you want to consider, now we're older adults, so some of you might have the financial means to actually retire. I, on the other hand, don't. My ex-husband did wipe me out when I was 50, so this mom's not going to be retiring for a long time, but that's okay because this mom's also a workaholic and I really don't know what I would do without work, so I love working. But you want to think about, are you going to be working or are you going to be retiring? So there's different visas for that, right? So some countries have a retirement visa process and then the work visa process. So in China, the work visa process was a little bit cumbersome. And, I had a job secured before I moved over here. And so I personally am not brave enough to go somewhere without having a job lined up. And that's partially because of my financial situation. And then partially just because I kind of want to have something in place before I get somewhere. So I did have this job lined up. I got it because of a friend. And so I may not have picked Wuhan, China if I didn't know somebody that was living here happily and safely. And so you just got to think about what are you doing? Do you know somebody in that country? What do you know about it? And what are you planning to do? So I got a job. I can put a link to a recruiter that I know who recruits for university jobs in China. I can put a link below for that. But that's pretty much the only one I know. I think I was looking into Cambodia and Taiwan I had lived in before. So, I also have some resources there if people are looking to get English teaching jobs overseas. Now, there's a caveat to that. So, in the US, we have laws that we can't discriminate. Technically, there's not supposed to be age discrimination, even though there really is. But, they spell out ages for jobs. So here in China, I could not have gotten a job if I was over the age of 60. That's why I scrambled to get here when I was 59, because I thought, if I don't do this now, I'm not going to know what it's going to be. And so I did it. I scrambled around and I got here while I was still 59. Rumor has it that if you get a job here in China when you're 59 and you stay at the same school, they might renew your visa after the age of 60. But if you're over the age of 60, now don't quote me on this because it could change at any time. If you're over the age of 60, there's slim chances that you're going to get a job teaching English in China. And I did look into some other countries that are more lenient. So that, you can find out that stuff on Google. There's a resource, I think, called Teaching Nomad. And they're a recruiter that they place teachers in many different countries. And so they have all the age requirements of the different countries. So it is possible to get jobs as, an older adult, but you just have to know which country you're going to and if there's some age requirements around that. And so the next thing, are you going to get a job, or are you just retiring, or are you slow traveling? Some people will slow travel their way, like they're digital nomads and they just like to slow travel. So maybe that's you. There's some other channels that you can watch for that. But I'm working, and so I had to go through the work visa process here in China, which was a little cumbersome but doable. And then the other thing that you want to consider, so I'm sharing all of the emotional things first. So the other thing you want to consider is just how adaptable are you? I'm pretty adaptable because life has made me be adaptable. Somehow I just kept getting these weird jobs that would go through changes, and somehow I just would learn how to adapt to all the changes at the jobs. And, I've gotten laid off a couple of times. I'll probably make another video about that. But just the divorce, how adaptable are you? And are you able to roll with things? And so you want to think about that before you're moving to a different country, because if you're really set in your ways, you got to be able to develop that AQ. So, during the pandemic, they came out with this new term, AQ, adaptability quotient. So IQ, is how smart we are. EQ is how intelligent we are. And AQ is how adaptable we are. So they said, okay, people that are really adaptable handled the pandemic pretty well, but those with a lower AQ really struggled during the pandemic. And so try to understand what your AQ is, how adaptable are you, and if you struggle, you want to probably build up your AQ a little bit, put yourself into some uncomfortable situations if you're considering a move abroad, like do different stuff. If that's if you want to move abroad, because you'll be put into some, to me it's comfortable, but that's because I have a relatively high AQ, and it was developed over just years of weird stuff happening to me, and that's how I developed it. So this transition is not difficult for me at all. You want to consider your housing expectations too. When we're older, sometimes we have these expectations that we haven't thought about. And I'll give you this example. So I traveled with a couple of friends to Siem Reap, and we visited a different friend of ours who lived there. And I immediately felt at home in Siem Reap, that's in Cambodia. And I thought, wow, I could live in this city. Whereas my friends were like, oh, no, we could never live here. We're fine traveling here, but we could never live here. And then we went to his apartment, which I was like, oh, this is a cute apartment. I could live in this apartment. I could see myself living here. And my one friend, who I thought was just as adaptable as I am, she was like, oh, I could never live there. And I was like, why? She was like, well, the kitchen area is out on the balcony, which it was. They had the kitchen area was kind of out on the outside for some reason. I don't know why. Which for me, that didn't bother me because I think that's a hot climate. So it's better to have it out there for cooking, I would think, so you don't get all the fumes and stuff inside. But for her, that was like a deal breaker. She's like, I could never live here. So you want to really think about what your expectations for housing is. The other thing too, in Asia, we don't really have ovens. Now there's some houses that do. So if it's an expat friendly house, like when I lived in Taiwan, like my pastor, for example, they rented a full house and it had an oven in there. So you want to think about what's your budget, how do you like to live, and what kind of house do you really need to function. So that kind of trickles over to the dietary stuff too. So you want to think about what are your dietary needs. So when I when I was at home, I was shopping all organic. I shopped at the co-op and every organic food store, and I knew ahead of time, well, I'm going to go over there and I might not be able to find organic. I can find some organic, but I'm mostly just eating what there is. So think about what your dietary needs are, and are you going to be able to access these foods in the country, or are you going to be sensitive to the foods that they have? So for example, if you have type 2 diabetes, for example, or if you are gluten intolerant, like how is that going to roll in whatever country you're going to be? So I do have some gluten-free friends here in Wuhan, but they do all their own cooking, and they order their groceries in and they cook. They don't run around eating at the cafeteria like I do. And then also, if I were a strict vegetarian, I eat a lot of plant-based, I always have, but I'm not a vegetarian, I eat meat. And so the food that I got for lunch today, it was mostly vegetables, but each dish had a little meat in it. So my green beans had some kind of minced up pork in it, and my eggplant also had some kind of meat. And then, everything that I ordered, even the tofu had meat with it. So I didn't mind that because I'm not a strict vegetarian. But if you are, these are just things to think about before moving abroad. You want to think ahead. One thing that the experts recommend is traveling to the place that you want to move to and just living there for 2 months if you're able to do that. I wasn't able to do that just because of my financial situation. So I was really taking a big leap here by moving over here. But I had lived in Taiwan, so I sort of knew what to expect. Along those lines of AQ and adaptability, let's talk about products that you might think need. Like, we're getting older. I remember when I was 28, like, oh, my hair was all thick and beautiful and I didn't really do anything to it. I just ate whatever. I didn't have, but now that I'm older, there's product that I use like for my face and my hair. So can you get those products in the country of your choice? So you just want to think about that. And what if you can't get them? What are you going to do? Or like for me, I couldn't. I finally found my Tresemme hairspray, and I'm so glad I got it. But I couldn't find it for a while, so my hair was really wilty, and I was like, well, I guess this is just how I'm going to look now. I have wilty hair in my 60s, and it is what it is. So you just want to think about that and know your own personality type too, because part of being adaptable is, how do you make friends? And I will do a whole nother video on building community, but you want to know, when you get here, you might have one friend. Like I had one friend when I got here, but that one friend can't be my only friend, right? I have to figure out how I'm going to socialize, and am I introverted or extroverted? How much do I need for socialization, and how am I going to do that? So, I had I leveraged my skills that I had back home. I had gone through a lot of change, like I keep sharing. I went through a divorce, had to build some community and new community after that. So you just want to know how you're going to go about these things when you move to your new country, because it's real. And the other thing too, you want to anticipate how people are going to react when you tell them, I'm going to move overseas. Like, are people relying on you being there still? So you want to think about that. I had one friend who, basically just kind of shut down when I told her I was moving to China. She didn't want to see me right before I left. And she was I think she was hurt. But just her reaction wasn't acting like hurt. It was acting more like, pushing me away or whatever. But we're kind of back in step now. But, people are going to might have some weird reactions. And I picked China, which, in the U.S., because of all the media, people were like, oh, I'm afraid for you. And, I had to listen to all that. Meanwhile, the day they were telling me they were afraid for me, we had a school shooting in our city, right? Like, and so I would just be like, oh, yeah, I'll be fine. And, I just kind of was ready to not argue back with people that felt that they were afraid. And my one friend, she was just like, she handled it. She was like, oh, okay, I guess you're afraid. You're afraid about stuff that we have opposite fears. I told her, because she was like, I'm afraid for you. And then I told her, well, you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of staying here, being stuck and staying stagnant for the last 20 years of my life. That's what I'm afraid of. And then she just kind of laughed. And so we were back in step after that. So, People are going to have these different reactions. My one friend has a military background, and she, of course, was really worried about me moving to China, but we're still in step. She came along with me for this journey. So people might have these different reactions, so just kind of be ready for it. You want to start planning how you're going to say goodbye to your current country and to your family and your friends. Plan your farewells in a way that's going to be meaningful to you. I really didn't want to have a big party, so I just made time over the months to get together with people. Some people I got together with before I announced I was moving. So, I didn't tell them I was leaving. I knew, hey, I might not see these people for a few years, so I'm going to make sure I invest in them before I go. And then I announced, or I might have given them a hint while I was meeting with them. That's the other thing. I really wasn't talking about this with a whole lot of people before I left until I was very sure. So it wasn't until January when I put in my notice at work that I finally announced it officially, like I'm leaving and moving to Asia. But some people knew, like the people in my apartment building knew, my close friends knew what I was up to, but I wasn't talking about it very much to too many people. Even like my extended family, I wasn't really sharing. I was decluttering, and I was calling it a midlife reset. But you want to plan your farewells and how you're going to communicate these changes that you're making in a way that's meaningful for you. And people said, oh, you should have a party. I didn't really want to have a party, and I just did it in my own way. So the next thing is, you might be working and you're thinking about all this. And I was happily employed. I had this job that I really actually liked. There were some issues going on, though, that I'll share maybe later in some other story. But, I was really on the fence. So I was planning this thing for the whole time. I had my interview at the school in June. They offered me a contract, and I told them, okay, I can't come until February because I need to get out of my apartment. There's all these things to do. So I said, I can come at second semester, not first semester. So I told the school, and then I started the visa process with them, which was kind of lengthy. But the whole time, summer in Wisconsin is amazing, right? So I accepted the job in June, which is the best season in Wisconsin. And so my heart, I was teetering back and forth. I was having a wonderful summer at home with my friends, and I was in this choir that I loved, and I was just having so much fun. And I actually liked my job a lot. And so I was back and forth and back and forth. And I was like, I don't know when I'm going to tell them when I'm going to quit, right? So I was going to for sure give them 2 weeks, at least. I wanted to give them a month. But the visa process for China was really weird. Like it just was kind of a nail-biting situation. So I came here on February 20th, and I put in my notice at work in January. And I knew personally I couldn't just leave work, scramble around. It was winter by then, so winter in Wisconsin is really yucky. And so I knew I needed some beach time before I came and started a whole new thing, because it's cooler here in the winter. So I was like, no way, I'm not gonna go from winter to winter. It's not happening. I'm going to winter to beach to China. So I gave them 2 weeks notice, and I gave myself the 2 weeks at the beach that I needed. So I ended up I forgot how the story went, but I gave my notice, I quit my job, and then I went to Hawaii to visit my friend, and I stayed with her for a couple of weeks and got warm, laid out in the sun. Then I ended up coming back to Milwaukee, back to the cold. It was super cold too. And I had to wrap everything up real quick and just, tie up all the loose ends. And then I went to Cambodia by myself because, again, I wanted to be warm and sleep off my jet lag before I started working here in China. So I was able to come here on February 20th, and then I had to start working right away. And so I just knew what I needed. So just know what you need. And if you have to quit your job, like, how are you going to do it? You just have to think about it. So that's how I went about it. And I still miss that job, and I think about it like, oh, I love that job, but I love it here too. So it's good to leave things when you still love them. And I do love Wisconsin. The other thing too is there's all these expat groups out there on Facebook. So I started joining the pages for Wuhan early because that kept my eye on the prize. I was like, keep your eye on the prize, keep your eye on the prize. Because remember, I told you I was waffling back and forth. So I needed to keep my eye on the prize while I was doing the planning. And so I joined all these Facebook groups to do that. And there were expat groups that you can join and ask questions. There's travel groups that you can join to ask questions. And so I was doing that, and that it just kept my energy going toward this big life change that I was about to make. So the last thing is, and that's kind of along these same lines, is what are you going to do if you don't like it? Like, what's your backup plan? So I wrapped everything up, right? Everything was wrapped up at home. I've got something in my eye. I got a piece of hair in my eye. I wrapped everything up at home, and I kept thinking I was relatively happy when I left, but I knew I would regret it if I didn't take this leap. So, there's all this like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And so I had this backup plan that if I didn't like it, this is what I was going to do. So the things that I saved, if you watch my declutter video, the things that I saved were like, okay, if I hate this after a year, I'll come back and I'll still have this chair. I'll have, these dishes and all that kind of stuff. And so I do love it. But just know that that fear is kind of normal, and just, am I doing the right thing? Am I making the right choice? When you are a person that's filled with passion, it's just normal to have those fears and doubts, especially right at the last minute. So what is your backup plan going to be if you don't like it? And some people don't like living overseas. So I've kind of divided this checklist into the emotional, the practical of the preparation, and then, when you get there, like once you take the leap. So the emotions of it are very real, and you should consider, you really need to think about it. And I think I shared, enough about the back and forth thinking that I had. And I know this is very common for people that move overseas, like right before you take the leap. I mean, it's kind of like getting married, I suppose, or any big change. You're like, am I doing the right thing? So, I had another friend who was going through a change. She was just going to move in the same city, but both of us were like, well, if we don't do it, are we going to regret it? So that was what was in my own head. I'm like, if I don't do this, am I going to regret it? I know I'm happy now. I can always come back home if I don't like it. But if I don't do it, am I going to regret it? So that's the thing that I kept in my mind. So now let's get to the practical. So there's all these practical things that we have to consider when we're moving abroad. And the first two, are obvious. The passport issue. So you got to make sure your passport has enough time left on it. So I had just recently renewed mine. So I've got, 9 more years left on this passport, but you have to have at least 6 months. I recommend, getting it renewed and making sure you're all set to go there. And then the visa process. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So when you have a job, usually your school will kind of give you some support along the way. So my school did that, but, countries and their communication are very different. So there's something called apostille. There's certain documents that you have to get, and you have to get them either notarized or apostilled, which I never even heard of apostille before, but some countries you have to do that. So you have to figure out for your state, what is the apostille process? So for my case, I had to get, for my China visa, I had to get my university degree apostilled. So that I had to take it to the state of Wisconsin, and they had to verify. The apostille process basically verifies that the document is authentic. And so I had to figure out how to do this in the state of Wisconsin. The other document that I had to do was my background check. I had to get that apostilled. So first I went and got a federal background check, and I tried to get it apostilled, and they weren't responding. The federal government wasn't responding. It was like I was going to have to fly to DC and go to the office directly or something. But then luckily, one day I just drove up to the state of Wisconsin. I took a day off of work and asked them, and they were like, well, we can apostille the thing here, but you have to do a state of Wisconsin one. You can't do a local one. It has to be a state one. So then I had to redo my background check, and it had to be a state of Wisconsin background check, and then my state apostilled it. But I had to check with my school to see, hey, do you need a federal one or a state one? So there was all these little picky things within the visa process. So you want to give yourself the time first, find out what you need, And then secondly, give yourself the time that there might be some glitches. So I shared with you in a different video, I think, like I had to get a physical before I came to this country to, and on it, I had to use a certain form from China. It was like a government physical form, like health report form. And they wanted to check that I didn't have any like TB or diseases that could spread in the country, and also sexually transmitted diseases. And they wanted to check that I was healthy enough to actually work here. So I had to go to my doctor, get this done. And then I brought it back and they were like, oh, you didn't stamp, you have to have a stamp, the clinic stamp on it, but you only had one stamp and we require 2 stamps. Well, no one told me that they required 2 stamps. So you have to plan in time for that, because you run into all this weird stuff that people probably don't tell you. And my school was being very helpful, and I had a checklist of stuff that I had to do, but then, oh, by the way, this came up, and so I'm not blaming the school. It's just like, that's just kind of how it is. You move to a different country and there's weird stuff that come up in the visa process. You want to give yourself time for it and then understand what the process is and how you go through it. So the next topic should be obvious. It's finances. So you want to think about your finances. First of all, you're going to need to set aside some relocation expenses. How much is it going to cost for you to get to the place that you're going? And then you got to figure out how much is it going to cost you to get set up wherever you are. So, I got rid of a lot of stuff, and in the back of my mind was, okay, when I get there, I can buy pots and pans. I can buy this, I can buy that. And so I had a number set aside for how much it was going to cost me just to get my life set up here in this country in China. And then also, you have to think about your flight, and so think about your relocation expenses. But then you want to think about other things like, if you're retiring, are you going to be tapping into your pension? So how are you going to access your money from wherever it is? And if it's Social Security, how are you going to access your Social Security paycheck from your new country? So just think about those different things. You want to communicate with your financial institution. So I sent emails to all of my credit card companies. I let them know I was moving and that I'd be using this credit card overseas. I let my bank know and informed them. And so there was that. And just thinking about all these things related to banking and all your financial institutions. You want to get all your ducks in a row there. You want to think about these bank accounts that you're going to keep open. I closed some of my accounts. I whittled them down because at one point I was on this thing where, they have those deals where you can get $200 if you open a new account. So I had a whole bunch of accounts and I closed them all down. I whittled it down to the main one. And then I whittled my credit cards down too to the main ones. But I'm not going to close my U.S. accounts, no way. And so I'm keeping those active, and also your phone number. So everything now is linked to your phone number. So I've heard of people saying, oh, no, I just got rid of my U.S. phone. Like, how can you do that, right? Anytime I log in to anything, somehow my phone number, the verification process is always linked to that phone number. So I did not cancel my phone. I only use my U.S. phone here in my house, and I keep it on airplane mode. So I'm only using it off of Wi-Fi, and I'm not using my data at all on my U.S. phone, and I have the most basic plan. But then this basic plan does allow for Wi-Fi texting. So if I'm logging into some account and then suddenly they're like, oh, we need to verify you on this phone, I use the Wi-Fi texting, and it's working very well for me. I'd rather not have to pay for this monthly fee, but it is what it is, and that's how our life is now. So I have 2 devices. I've got my Chinese device that I use, and that is so cheap. I pay like $7 a month or some really cheap price. And that's my main phone that I use for everything over here. And then I've got my US phone that I use for just certain things. And again, keeping it on airplane mode all the time. Also, taxes. You have to think about that. We're older adults now. So, what are we going to do about our taxes? So you're going to have to pay taxes in the country that you're living in, but then also probably back at home, depending on if you're earning an income, but you're going to have to file taxes. So I actually have an accountant. I don't make a whole lot of money, but I've had this accountant for a long time. And so I'm going to be working with my accountant. I consulted him. I called my 401k provider just to, talk to them a little bit. So you want to consult your professionals, your tax professionals, your financial professionals, and just make sure you've got all your ducks in a row there. Next comes all the stuff that we have living as grown-ups in, whatever country you're in, but most of my viewers are in the US. So, we have housing. So maybe I was renting, so that was easy for me. But if you have a house, you got to figure out, are you going to sell it or rent it? So there's that, right? And then your car, what are you going to do with your car? I looked into storage and I was like, no way, that's too costly and cumbersome. I'm not going to store it. I looked into my car, lending it to somebody. My son didn't want my car. I looked into lending it to somebody. It just looked like way too much liability. So in the end, I ended up selling my car and then my stuff. So, you got to figure out, what are you going to do with your stuff? So we're not just going to get rid of everything and not have any stuff, right? So if you watch my declutter video, I still had stuff that I left. It was not very much, but I still had it and I needed to store it somewhere. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of family that could take my stuff. So, I'm very single and I kind of have this motto with my son. I'm the mom, you're the kid, you don't take care of me, I take care of you. So I've always had that with him. So I wasn't going to leave my stuff with my son. So I looked into storage units and I was well on my way to rent a storage unit and I was going to pay like $600 a year, I think, for that. And I heard that if you pay storage units a year in advance, you lock in the price. Versus if you just go month to month, they end up jacking it up on you and it can get pretty costly that way. But then at the last minute, I have some good friends that they were like, hey, we've got this extra space in our basement. And so please don't do that, right? Don't pay for storage. Just please let us help you this way. So how lucky am I, right? So, but you have to think about where you're going to put your stuff and how much storage do you need and how are you going to do it. And then with that too, you have to think about what address are you going to use back at home. So I actually was looking into they have these virtual mailboxes because I knew I needed to have a US address. Like you can't just, you just can't, I don't know. For me, I wasn't comfortable just saying, no, I don't live there anymore. Like I needed a US address. So I looked into a company called America's Mailbox, which is in South Dakota. And so there's a lot of virtual, like people that are, digital nomads, or they travel, like there's a lot of retired people that are slow travelers and they got rid of everything and they just slow travel. Like maybe they live in a van or they slow travel around the world. And so they use America's Mailbox as their address. And so they will open all your mail and then scan it into you. If you have something that needs to be seen, you let them know, hey, can you scan that to me? And then they would scan it to you. And then you could deal with whatever the stuff is. So if you get something from the government or you get, I don't know, whatever, they're there and they'll scan it to you. And then also you set up an account so they will ship anything around the world. So I set up this thing with them. But then my friends turned around and they were like, why don't you just keep this Wisconsin address for now and use ours? And so I ended up doing that, which thank you, friends. It's so great to have good friends like that. So you have to think about what's going to be your permanent address, especially if you don't have family that, is offering something like that to you. Not that my family is bad, but it's just that's not what our relationship is. And I wasn't going to ask for it from my family members. And so anyway, so your address. So those are things to consider. Your stuff, your address, and your car. What are you going to do with all those things? Healthcare is the other thing. I mean, we're older now. So when I was young, I wasn't thinking about this at all when I moved overseas. But, back then, insurance wasn't really a thing. But now insurance is everything, especially in the U.S. So you want to think about your health insurance. Do you need an international plan? So whatever country you're going to. I came to China and I do have health insurance through my job, but it's only, for Wuhan. So if I travel outside of Wuhan or if I go back home or to a different country, I need to consider my international health insurance needs. And so I'm not going to recommend any health insurance companies to you. There's enough out there that you can search for, but you want to think about it. And Medicare isn't always going to cover overseas. So you want to understand, Medicare A, what does it cover? Medicare B, what does it cover? And your health insurance is one thing. And then just your medical condition. So you want to, first of all, all my documents that I might need, I digitized them and I brought the hard copies with me. I didn't leave my birth certificate at home or any of that stuff. It's all with me here. So you want to digitize everything. And I digitize my medical records because I've shared in other videos, I do have a thyroid condition. So, and I've got chronic fatigue, which is probably related to the thyroid condition, and I have scoliosis. So I digitized all that. When I'm going to doctors here, I can easily communicate what I need to communicate and pull out the records that I need. So one thing that I did is I stocked up on my prescription. I talked to my doctor ahead of time, and I said, hey, I'm moving to China. I'm going to probably need like 3 or 4 months to settle in. Can you give me 4 to 6 months of my thyroid prescription, because I'm going to need it. So she did that. She was happy, and I went and picked it up, and I came over here with 6 months of my prescription. And I recently went to the doctor, and they were able to, I got a new prescription over here. So that was great. But it wasn't the exact same one. So I think it's going to work out, but just kind of be aware of that. Like, your prescriptions could be an issue. The other thing too is vaccinations. You want to just consider, are you behind on any vaccinations? Just talk to your doctor about all that. You want to think about your supplements too. I mean, I'm an older adult, and so I have certain supplements that I like to take. And I was worried I wasn't going to be able to find them here. So I stocked up and I brought those, enough with me for I think 6 months or so, and now I'm just starting to run out of some of them. But I like this certain brand of multivitamin. It's called Rainbow Light, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get it here, and I can through this Taobao app. Some of them, and then I ended up doing all my power of attorney stuff. I have a good friend who I really trust, and I asked her if she would be my medical power of attorney and my financial power of attorney in case something happens to me. So I got that taken care of, and I don't have a whole lot of assets, and everything that I have is going to go to my son, so it's pretty simple. My life is pretty simple, but if your life isn't as simple as mine, I did a really basic will, and took care of it, got it notarized and everything, and I left that with my friend in case something would happen to me while I'm overseas. And so the thing is your driver's license. So I did renew my driver's license so it wouldn't be expired when I got home. If I come home, I moved to a country where I do not need a car. I do not want to drive over here at all. So that's not something that interests me. But if you're going to a country and you want to drive, you're going to need an international driver's license. So get that taken care of. And then you want to think about where are you going to stay when you get to your country, right? So I've watched a lot of videos about this. Some people recommend just planning to stay in a hotel for the first month. Now, when I got to China, I had an apartment waiting for me here at the university that came with my package, so I had nothing to worry about. But when I went to Taiwan, and this was when I was young, I didn't have anything lined up. My school was going to help us find apartments, but they didn't really guarantee that we would find one. And so it was kind of this collaborative, let's find a place for you to live so you can teach here thing. So I actually lived in a hotel for the first 2 weeks when I moved to Taiwan. That was when I was 28. And then after that, I went and found a hostel because I didn't want to commit to an apartment without being comfortable with where it was at. So think about those things. Like I wouldn't jump into any kind of lease personally without seeing the place first. Some of you did ask me how I packed for my move, because knowing I wasn't just traveling, I was actually moving. So I wanted to share that with you. So I packed things that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to find when I got here. So supplements I packed. I just didn't know if I was going to be able to have my supplements. So I packed like 4 to 6 months of that. My prescription, I packed 4 to 6 months of my prescription that I need for my thyroid. I went, shopping for the makeup that I like to use and the hair products that I like to use, the shampoo that I like to use. Those things I packed. Just different, like I did pack some tea. That's kind of weird, but I wanted just to have my bedtime tea that I like to drink. So I packed that, but then I was just like, okay, that's all I get to pack. And then basically my clothes, I'm not a big fashion person. So if you watch my videos, you see I'm wearing the same stuff all the time. And that's really how I've always dressed like that. I don't like to have all these clothes. So I packed basic things that I needed to teach. And here we have 2 weathers. So there's winter and summer. So I packed some basic summer attire, some basic winter attire, and it was all pretty much teacher friendly attire, except for workout clothes and pajamas. So I did that. Those were things that I packed, but really, really basic. I had a big suitcase and a little suitcase. I packed my documents that like my personal documents, my birth certificate, everything that I needed in case I needed to show originals for my visa. I packed 3 4 pairs of shoes. I brought a dress pair just in case, a pair of sandals. I wear these Ufus flip-flops that I just love so much. They're comfortable. I packed workout shoes, and then I just packed 1 pair of like winter leather shoes that, for teaching. So just a few pairs of shoes I packed. And then I just figured, okay, I'm just going to have to buy things when I get there. I've bought some new skirts and just different things that I need, mostly for teaching. Also, think about the language. So, now is so easy because you have all these apps. So I downloaded, I have Microsoft Translate, I have Google Translate, I have an app called DeepL, which is a translation app, and then I have an app called Baidu Translate. And they all work differently. So I recommend downloading, a few different translation apps because that's going to help you function with your communication. And really, I've noticed that with all these apps, my Chinese is not getting much better. I had Chinese when I came here, but you really don't need it because of all these apps, right? And so, so that's one thing. So get your apps, but then you're going to want to learn some basics of the language. So figure out, there's all these ways to learn now, like Duolingo and Babbel and all these different apps that you can get to learn languages. So I really recommend that. And I have to say that I do rely on the little Chinese that I have, which is very basic. I had it from Taiwan, and I rely on it a lot just to get around and talk to people and be friendly. So make sure you start learning the language before you go. So lastly, when you get to your new country, find a way to connect with expats who can help you get a house and all that kind of stuff. But you also are probably going to need to register with the local government. So if you get a job and you're teaching English, so both times I moved overseas, I was teaching English. My school helped me with these things. So when I came to China, my school came with me to the police station to register, and everything's kind of going through the school because they're sponsoring my visa. And that was the same thing for Taiwan. That my school helped me with all of that stuff. So if you're doing this on your own or you're retiring, that's something you're gonna have to figure out once you get there. What do you have to do? So this was a pretty comprehensive checklist that I gave you. You could probably find even more comprehensive checklist if you go into some kind of AI app like DeepSeek or ChatGPT. They could probably list it all out for you. I'll put some notes in the description, this video description below, just to review what we talked about here. Definitely drop comments, any questions that you might have. Hopefully I shared enough emotion with you. I personally like hearing how people struggled through different things and what was in their head and what they were thinking about when they, were making decisions. So I'm hoping that I gave enough of that to you so that you understand, it's a very emotional decision to make to just upend your life and move overseas. So if you're somebody, especially an older adult that's considering this, good on you. Like, this is a big, big life change, and hopefully you'll keep going. If I can do it, you can do it. And I'm telling you, I am very happy that I did this. I don't regret it even one day. I am looking forward to second semester starting. I know I'm going to have like 200 students now, and I'm really excited. I get to see them next week, and just really excited for school to start again. Life in Wuhan is so easy and comfortable. There's things that you struggle with, and I'll share some of those things in an upcoming video. I mean, you got to figure out loneliness and culture shock and all those kinds of things. But all in all, it's definitely worth it. And I hope if you're considering it, this video helped you and, empowered you, because you can do it. And you'll be happy once you take that leap, I think. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure you will. So thank you so much for liking, subscribing, and recommending my video. I appreciate all the support, and I will see you in the next one.